Hi, everybody. My name's Colleen McCullough from Soil Association Scotland, and we're talking about whole farm planning today in the context of organic farms, looking at crop and livestock management plans in particular. And so we'll do just sort of introductions very quickly, then we'll look at a kind of quick overview of what are whole farm plans, what are the elements that make it up, what do you need to do, and then we'll look in a bit more detail at organic crop and livestock plans, which are the equivalent to the kind of non-organic animal health and welfare plan and integrated pest management plans. And then we'll have time for discussion and questions at the end. So I'm Colleen, and joining me today is Marc Dunn from our certification team at Soil Association, and so we'll hear from him in a little bit. And thanks to everybody for joining us. So Planning for Change is the name of our programme, looking at whole farm plans, and it's an 18-month programme of a kind of broad range of farm walks, webinars. We've produced a few case studies, and we'll do more practical resources, videos, how-to guides, all around kind of whole farm plans, but more generally that whole farm approach to farm management, whether you're organic, regen, conventional, somewhere in between, moving through those potentially, or just interested to find out a bit more. So the programme is kind of aims to use whole farm plans and the elements of that as a kind of starting point for looking at that wider whole farm approach and what that can look like in practice. And then through over the next year, up until next March, we'll kind of look at all the different elements in a bit more detail in webinars, farm walks, resources and things. So whole farm plans are something that's coming in this year. I imagine everyone will be aware now, if you're claiming basic payments from Scottish Government, you'll be required to kind of build up a whole farm plan between now and 2028. And the aim of that is to sort of make sure that everybody in Scotland who's claiming basic payments has a kind of consistent baseline of data for their farm or croft. And that is sort of partly to help the government measure where everybody is in terms of soil health, carbon, so that they can sort of measure and communicate what that looks like and how that changes over time. But then also with the sort of added hope that people will use that data that you have to collect to inform your own decision making and to help your decision making. If you've got kind of data, then you can use it. You might as well use it if you're having to collect it anyway. And that kind of phrase that I've been hearing a lot over the last few months of you can't manage what you don't measure. So kind of trying to make sure everybody's got that baseline measurement to then start using it. And the things that they sort of want to measure link into the climate and biodiversity and carbon emission targets from Scottish Government. So they're sort of trying to really link that in so that they're able to kind of measure and benchmark and communicate where Scotland is, maybe compared to other countries as well, but then what that can kind of also inform what support do people need to move towards, lower emission, better soil health, better animal health, reduced inputs for people that are non-organic, to sort of move it all in that direction. It's a lot easier to do if you know what your starting point is. And from our kind of point of view, that data that's collected around sort of farm environmental state and the emissions and everything also plays into potential farm objectives that farms and crofts might have for your own management, and that can vary across lots of different contexts. But and I don't know how easy the slide might be to read if the text is quite small. I realise it's a lot of text, but sort of using the kind of benchmarking data that you've got to inform, if you're trying to reduce your flood risk, for example, would you consider integrating trees into your system? Would you look at your soil organic matter and your kind of general soil health and how that fits in to flood risk reduction or drought risk reduction. This year we're seeing a lot kind of going both ways. Things around animal health and welfare, um, improving health, improving sort of livestock efficiency. Does that improve profitability, for example? Does it reduce the amount of inputs that you need to spend money on? Protecting and enhancing habitats, does that tie into then better habitat, shade and shelter for livestock, more habitat for pest predators and those sort of things. So it's kind of looking at that whole farm context and how all of these different things integrate into each other. And I think that's sort of how organic farms operate more generally, but kind of really looking in detail at some of those. So for the whole farm plans that are required by this May, they cover 5 areas over carbon, soil, biodiversity, and then animal health and welfare and IPM or crop management. So this is a sort of overview. I realise again there's a lot of text on this slide. I, I'm still trying to figure out a way to kind of capture all the information that you need on one slide without it all being very text heavy. But the 5 plans, 3 of them will need to be done sort of by everybody. And then the other 2 are dependent on whether you have kind of cropping systems or livestock systems. The first 3 around soil, carbon, and biodiversity or habitats need to be done every 5 years, and the crop management or IPM plans and livestock plans are annual ones. And for people that are in sort of supply chain schemes and things already, you might already have some of these. I think I've not met many people so far who haven't done any of these kind of audits. And if you're already organic, you'll already have a crop management plan if you're growing crops, or a livestock management plan. So the kind of aim of these is to measure and baseline soil, carbon, habitat, etc., and then sort of be able to look at it together to see where things could sort of potentially overlap or integrate, and are there opportunities to reduce inputs by improving soil organic matter or integrating trees and hedges, and sort of all of those things. So soil analysis. Be interesting to see in the chat if there's anybody that's never done a soil analysis. I think most people probably will have done some form of soil testing at some point. So for the requirements that apply from May this year, if you choose to do soil analysis as one of your audits that you put in through your whole farm plan, you can use a soil audit that has been done from last year, as long as it includes soil organic carbon, and it applies to all Region 1 land, so that's sort of cropping land, improved grassland. If it's Region 2 unimproved grassland, they recommend that you still do soil analysis, but it's not required for your whole farm plan requirements. And the aim of that is to kind of just baseline, across all the fields, what your soil health status is, what your soil organic matter looks like. Are there opportunities if you're using chemical inputs, for example? Is there an opportunity to reduce that? Different fields will have different sort of fertility levels, different needs, different nutrient availability and that sort of thing. And so it's to kind of make sure that everybody's got that same baseline and starting point to then measure change over time and see what, if any, action you might want to take. There's a few different labs there listed. We will be sending out in the email after this webinar. In the follow-up email, we'll have all the links to different sort of information pages, different labs, different um, sort of links to take you to much more detailed information for what you need to do next, for all of the different analysis. Um, and costs vary. So if you were doing your soil sampling from this year for your whole farm plan, um, you don't need to have all of your fields sampled for this year, but to just start doing some of the fields. And then by 2028, all fields will need to be done. So the suggested approach is to kind of do 20% of your fields per year, over a 5-year rolling period, to kind of spread it out. Some people might want to do all of their whole holding at once. If you've got a smaller holding, that might be manageable. So by 2028, everyone that has Region 1 land will need to have their soil sampled. And at the moment, you won't need to show what your soil sampling results are, but you'll need to have them on file in case you get inspected. And then over time, there might be the possibility that sort of soil health management plans, for example, might be introduced further down the line in the future. But at the moment, I think it's quite variable, the level of kind of sampling that has been done for all of these different audits. So they just want a baseline from everyone by 2028. Carbon audits is the next one. I think a lot of folk have done some form of carbon audit in the past, or at least kind of know vaguely how they work. This again is to sort of identify areas where emissions might be higher. That'll vary from type of farmer, croft, the type of business. If it's arable, if you're conventional, a lot of your emissions might come from fertilizer use and ploughing, for example. If you're a livestock-based business, a lot of that might come from livestock. If you give them feed rather than grass-based, that can put your score higher. And so it's to sort of try and start identifying where emissions could be lowered. And it's across, it includes methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide. There's a lot of different platforms that can be used. Some of them are free, some of them you pay an annual subscription or a one-off fee. Some of them, the more expensive ones, will have like an advisor to kind of do tailored advice. The free ones, the Farm Carbon Toolkit has quite a big sort of knowledge hub where there's a lot of resources, practical guides and things, technical resources for all sort of different farming scenarios. So it just depends what you've done already, what you want to do with that data. But it's probably sort of useful to think that once you kind of find a platform that suits your business, to keep using that same platform each time you do a carbon audit, so that the data that you get out of it is consistent. Because some of them measure things slightly differently, they measure slightly different things. So if you use different platforms, you get a slightly different answer. And what you want is to kind of measure change over time. So using the same platform consistently can help give a much better picture of any change over time. And again, there's no obligation at the moment to have a sort of management plan attached to this, or to upload your results of your carbon audit when you're putting in your paperwork, but you need to have it to hand in case you get inspected. And that just looks at it in slightly more detail, but I don't think you can really see it at this scale. Next is the habitat survey. So I think the aim is for over time that this year it started off as quite basic, just sort of habitat mapping, but over time it'll add more kind of detail into it and look at sort of condition of habitats, and add in like biodiversity auditing, as well as the habitat map, so that that can build a picture over time of environmental condition of a farmer croft, and sort of identify areas where, is the bits where you can put in connecting habitat like hedges and things. Look at natural capital on a holding? Have you got, trees, hedges? What's the habitat like there? And is there sort of easy wins where you could tweak what you've got to make habitats more available or higher quality for wildlife? But at the moment for this year, it's habitat mapping. There is an app coming soon from Nature Scott. I think this year they're doing a second round of um, testing, piloting, that's the word I'm looking for, in with users, with farms and crofts for using that. So at the moment, for people doing habitat surveys this year, you can do it through your LPIS, your land parcel ID system on the rural payment website, or a paper map or a digital map. And there's a drop down list of all the habitat types that you sort of fill in what's the kind of biggest habitat in each field or area. And so, yeah, they will accept paper maps coloured in with pencils as well, if that's your style. And then on to the last two that we're going to speak a bit more about in a bit more detail when I pass over to Mark in a wee minute. The IPM plan, Integrated Pest Management, is for if you're non-organic and kind of links to the organic crop management plan. And again, there's a few different platforms. If you're part of Red Tractor, for example, you might have already done this. The Plant Health Centre website, which we'll send a link for, has quite a detailed plan that you can work through, and it looks at not just sort of what chemicals you're using for pest control, but the whole, it fits in really well with the whole farm approach because it's sort of looking at what's going on the rest of the farm. What's the diversity of your cropping like? What's the diversity of your rotation like? What's your soil health like? Building in sort of routine monitoring for pests and kind of prediction informed decision making. And if you're using chemical pesticides, to kind of build in lots of steps and kind of management approaches so that using chemicals is kind of the last resort rather than the first thing that you go to. So that's just that table in a wee bit more detail. But today we're going to look at the organic crop management plan, which is the sort of equivalent to this one. And that's an annual requirement. And then the animal health and welfare plan links to the organic livestock management plan, which Marc will go through in a minute. So that's sort of looking at reducing emissions, improving your sort of efficiency around livestock. So that looks like your kind of breeding intervals and things, your and disease risk, how you manage kind of medication, and how that all kind of fits together, looking at disease risk and managing that. Again, there's a few different templates if you're not organic and that are free to use. The Scottish Animal Health Planning System, I think that stands for, is one that's used, I think, by vets quite a lot. And so we'll have links to all of those in the email that we send around. So I'll not spend too much time looking at that because Marc will look at this in a wee bit more detail. And then I'll rush the last few slides so that we don't run out of too much time. So that's all of the kind of audits that are required to do. So for 2025 for May, you'll need to pick 2 out of the 5 audits to have for your whole farm plan. And then by 2028, you'll need to have all of the ones in place that apply to your situation. So if you don't have livestock, you won't need to do that one, of course. And so it's up to people individually which 2 they want to start with. But if you're organic already and you have crops and livestock and have those plans in place, then you automatically tick both of those. And the biodiversity one, as well can be quite a straightforward one to kind of start with if you haven't already done soil testing and carbon audits. So all of those plans are kind of designed to fit into this whole farm approach, and they tie in a lot of things that align quite a lot with sort of regenerative and organic and agroecological approaches, and all have sort of a focus on soil health, soil organic matter, increasing diversity, increasing rotations, looking at how you manage fertility and nutrient cycling, sort of building that in all the way through a rotation. If you have crop rotations rather than sort of at just one or 2 points, and then reducing inputs if you have inputs, with ultimately the hope of improving resilience, and profitability as well. So I thought I'd just add in this wee slide here that may or may not be very easy to see. I don't know how big it's going to show on everyone's screens, but the sort of looking at regenerative conservation farming that was on the previous one and organic, there's a lot of similarities, and all of these things tie in with the sort of whole farm approach where we're looking at nutrient cycling rather than importing nutrients all the time, building in diversity, so that, for example, weed pressure doesn't build up from having the same crop over and over, and that sort of thing. And the difference between regen and organic being around the inputs that you're allowed to use, for example. And then a slide on agroecology that kind of links to regen and organic, but sort of explicitly brings in the kind of social side of it as well, and links the food production to the food consumption, and how that all kind of links together. But that kind of holistic approach, linking very well to kind of what we're talking about. And there is a list of useful links that I don't expect you to be able to see at the moment, but we'll share these afterwards in the follow-up email, probably early next week. And I will stop talking there and pass over to Marc if I stop sharing my screen. There we go, find the stop sharing button. So that's a sort of very brief overview, and I apologize if it feels like a bit of a rush, of the sort of requirements around the whole farm plan and all the different audits. We will be doing more webinars, events, putting resources on our website that we'll send a link to, looking at everything in a bit more detail. If anybody's got any questions about any of that bit, pop it in the chat, and I'll pass over to Marc, and we'll look at, for the organic context, crop management plans and livestock management plans, and kind of what that looks like in practice. If you haven't done one before, what are the things that you need to kind of think about before you're doing one, and then we can have a bit of a chat about them in particular, and how that relates to the kind of whole farm approach, and see what people's questions are. So I will stop talking and pass over to Marc Dunn, who works in our certification team.
Thanks, Colleen. Just going to quickly share my screen. So hopefully everyone can now see a copy of the Soil Association Crop Management Plan templates.
Yes, we can.
Super. Okay. So when you certify with Soil Association, part of the requirements is that you complete a crop management plan if you produce any crops, or a livestock management plan if you manage any livestock. So this would be completed and we'd review it in the office. And this is essentially what our inspectors will use for benchmarking what you're doing on the holding. So they'll have this with them at the inspection, and they'll be using this as a sort of looking at what you say you're doing, and then looking to see that that's actually being carried out in practice. We get quite a sort of broad spectrum of people joining Soil Association, from seasoned farmers to people who are just moving into farming as a sort of new enterprise, or a sort of a new venture. So there's quite a lot of support available if you're not sure where to start in the first instance with designing your sort of farm setup. So the certification team can sort of support on what you can and can't do within the standards, and the farming and land use team can kind of help with more tailored and specific support on-farm practices. But as a bit of a jumping off point, so as I say, this is the crop management plan, and this is what we'd get you to complete after applying with us. So as Colleen's kind of already outlined, the real key component to this is having a strong and robust crop rotation in place. We will kind of go into how this affects integrated pest management as we go through, but this is really the sort of foundation for our sort of crop producers, is this crop rotation. So the sort of key organic principles are that there's a balance that must be achieved between fertility building and exploitative cropping. So you should have like a fertility building stage followed by exploitative cropping. So that could be, say, 2 years of green manures or legumes, and then something extractive like potatoes or cabbage, and then something perhaps less extractive and deep rooted afterwards. Rotations must include a leguminous or nitrogen fixing sort of crop at some point in the cycle to help restore nitrogen balance within the soil. We'd be looking for variety of crops that has like differing root systems to help utilize nutrients within different depths of the soil. And this also helps build and maintain good soil structure, as well as managing weeds and stimulating other soil organisms. And the sort of fourth sort of principle for the organic production is that if you have crops of the same family, they are sort of broken up by time intervals. So if you've got lots of crops of the same family being grown at the same time, you run sort of higher risk of pest and disease. Generally, crops, even of different species, if they're the same family, have the same pest and disease risks. So it's important that if you have a rotation, these are ideally sort of staggered or split apart in some way to reduce that disease and pest pressure on the crops. So when you sort of initially start thinking about this crop rotation and designing it, it's not a requirement of the standards to do any sort of soil testing, but it can be a good starting point for building a baseline of what's the soil structure looking like, what do I need to introduce into the ground, and a sort of good jumping off point for where to start. I say it's not a requirement. You might already have this knowledge from experience on the holding. You may have already engaged with an agronomist and have a clear picture of this. But it's a good sort of jumping off point when making this initial design. The second part is considering your sort of market outlets and making sure that when you're doing this rotation, you have like a marketable crop at each stage, and there's like continuous routes to market throughout that cycle. So that might be a case of sort of staggering the production of one crop sort of year on year between fields. And again, sort of third consideration is making sure that if you're growing stuff of the same family, they're kind of like split apart. So things like, say, beetroot, spinach, and chard are kind of the same kind of family. So you'd ideally want to sort of separate out their productions as far as possible. I mean, if you're not familiar with how things sit within families, or you're not sure what crops can deliver on root depth or soil structure, Colleen kind of shared some links earlier, but we have a plethora of documents available online or from the team. We can kind of give a bit sort of further advice and support on that. So that really sort of builds the sort of foundations and sort of core of the crop management plan. On top of this, sort of, as well as like having the right crops in the right place, there are fertility products and soil conditioners that are permitted under the standards. So in the standards, there's basically a list of active ingredients of what can be used. Even though they're permitted under the organic standards, we'd still look at reducing these as far as possible. I mean, it's uncommon for people to operate completely without inputs, but it is possible. But really what we want to see in this section is what you're using, and importantly sort of why you're using it and how you've identified that requirement for it. If you have a rotation that has maybe quite a lot of extractive crops, or is like quite a short rotation, and you have a lot of inputs, then we'd likely sort of query like how sort of suitable the setup is for sort of maintaining the sort of farm and how that's sort of aligning with organic principles. But there's always nuance to these things, and we always want to have open and clear discussions with everyone. It's never going to be a sort of a particularly hard line on things. We always want to sort of engage and support our licensees to kind of achieve the best outcomes at all times. And I guess the kind of more directly relevant part for integrated pest management, we have like a sort of a small tick box part. I should caveat at this point, we are looking at restructuring the crop management plan, but it's not likely to change in terms of its contents. It might just be areas that need a bit more expansion on them. But we'd be looking at how you're sort of controlling pests without the need for pest prevention products. So we'd be looking at things like encouraging natural enemies and pests. So you could do that by having like species-rich margins around your fields. So encouraging sort of other wildlife into the area that might help control pest species in the area. Part of this is in your crop rotation. So breaking up species of the same family so that you don't have sort of high pest and disease anyway, sort of breaking apart that sort of monoculture idea. So improving sort of soil depth and structure as well can help encourage sort of soil-based wildlife that can kind of help manage pest species as well. As well, sort of, I mean, as I say pests, the way I'm sort of speaking is kind of directed towards like invertebrates and things, but weeds and stuff also fall under this. So you might employ things like intercropping, so undersowing in your crops to kind of help mat out the land to make sure that there's no room for weeds to sort of take hold and then sort of gain traction on the land. But similarly, like the sort of fertility inputs, there will be instances where your management plan, as robust as it is, still has areas that it needs to sort of tackle pests with intervention. Again, within the standards, there's a prescriptive list of what you can use. So like the fertility inputs, we'd be looking to see what you're using and most importantly, why you're using it. So we wouldn't want to see just sort of blanket applications of things just in case. We'd really want to see that you are identifying that something is happening on the holding and you're sort of taking action to sort of tackle that. And we'd really be looking for like specific, not specific, but ideally like close acting rather than sort of broad spectrum or generalist treatments for getting rid of pest species on the holding. But I'd say like if you're ever unsure of what you can and can't use, or you have some sort of questions on sort of alternatives, then you can always sort of speak to us and we can go through it in a bit more detail. Although in the first instance, we'd kind of get you to complete this. If you're not sure of any of the sections, you can give us a phone, drop us an email, and we're more than happy to sort of chat through any of the sections and kind of give a bit of sort of guidance and direction on any of them. I'm conscious that I've got to squeeze in livestock as well, so I'll put a pin in this now and we'll jump over to the livestock management plan. So hopefully everyone can see now the livestock management plan. So this has been recently updated. So as Colleen said, if you are already like QMS certified, then that is also equivalent. If you are QMS certified and you come to Soil Association, there is a slightly shorter management plan because a lot of what is required by QMS is also required by Soil Association. So we try and remove as much as the sort of duplication burden as possible because filling out forms is arguably the sort of hardest bit of anything. So with the livestock management plan, again, we'd kind of start off by looking at what are you producing on the holding, and we would just look for a bit of general information on why the sort of breed and stock is suitable for the land that you're producing it on. And we'll usually use that as sort of baseline for what you're going to be doing later on in the plan. We'll kind of keep looking back to that. Again, like the crop management plan, this is what the inspectors will have with them, and this is what they'll be using to sort of see that this is kind of what your plan is, like how is it being implemented in practice, and sort of seeing how that's being carried out. So really, there's a number of organic standards. I don't want to go into sort of too much depth on exactly what's needed for the organic standards. Kind of want to give a bit of an overview on sort of generally what's required. So housing, there needs to be sort of suitable space and dimensions for all the livestock. If you outwinter, then obviously this section isn't relevant for you, so we can kind of gloss over that. I think that the areas that I'd kind of like to cover most importantly, since we are on in a bit of a tight window, are things mainly sort of feeding and veterinary treatments. So as far as possible, feeding should be coming from your own holding, so it should be pasture that you produce. You're not sort of bringing in feed from external sources. It should ideally all be grown on your own land. If you have enterprises like dairy, where you do need like hard feeds or concentrates, sort of getting through periods up to lactation or through lactation, that's fine. It must be organic, but it also needs to be supplemented with forage as well, so they've got that roughage in their diet. In various instances, you might need to supplement with trace minerals and elements to look after the welfare of livestock. So it's quite common, say before topping a lambing, you might need more iodine in the diet. There are organic products available that you can use to sort of supplement this, but again, we would be looking to see that there is a requirement for these. So is there a vet recommendation or guidance that you need the supplementation, like what's the requirement for it? And within that, we'd also be looking at, okay, so yes, you can supplement with this product, but is there something you can do in your pasture management to improve those trace elements on the land itself? So it could be through like species-rich species-rich herbal lays or something similar that can kind of introduce these trace elements into the pastures and build that onto the holding naturally, rather than sort of supplementing from other sources. Disease prevention. So I think there's a lot of sort of misunderstanding and miscommunication about sort of disease prevention in organic livestock. So there's nothing that's explicitly prohibited, but what we do need to see is that there is a justification and reason for doing the treatments. So like prophylactic treatments are prohibited, so you can't carry out a treatment like you couldn't just sort of blanket treat with antibiotics just in case. It needs to be identified that there is a reason to be carrying out the treatments. So, I mean, I guess most commonly it's things like wormers will be seen on almost all farms at some point or another. So we'd be looking to see that there are fecal egg counts being done to identify that there's a requirement for the treatment to be carried out in the first place. And as far as possible, the wormers that are used are targeted, so ideally not broad spectrum. There's nuance within that, like you need to rotate your wormers so there's not resistance. So it might be that it's narrow, broad. It's just good to have that sort of cycle through. So again, there's nothing that's prohibited. It just needs to be clear why it's being used in the system. Again, within that, prevention is kind of the sort of focus for organics. So while treatments are fine, if you have like a chronic worm issue on the holding, we'd look to see that there are practices in place like clean grazing, rotational grazing, just making sure that there are more practices in place than just they get worms every year, so we're going to hit them with clear wormer every year. Like we need a more in-depth sort of plan, and that's sort of kind of outlined in the plan itself. So the sections should give guidance on what is required and why we're requiring it. But like the crop management plan, if there's anything that you're unsure about or you're struggling with completing the plan, you can phone the office and we can kind of go through things step by step and maybe explain things in a bit more detail on sort of what you can and can't use. How are we for time, Colleen? This is a very whistle-stop tour on livestock.
Yeah, you've got another 5 minutes, I think.
Another 5 minutes.
If you need it, yeah.
Yeah, no worries. So I mean, there's not. So this has been quite a rapid overview, but there are kind of more specialised sections of livestock management plan covering things like mastitis and stuff. I don't know if we can put hands up. Are there any poultry or pig producers in the channel just now? Don't know if I can see.
You can just shout out if you want to unmute yourself. And there might not be.
If not, then that makes things much easier. It was really just to say that there are specific pig and poultry plans. So these plans cover dairy, beef, and sheep production. There's the standards for the production of them all is generally quite well aligned, but pigs and poultry are a bit more specialised and sort of require a bit of a different plan and approach. I think I don't want to go into sort of more specific sections too much just now. I think I'd probably rather if people wanted to ask questions, they could kind of put a steer on the things that they kind of want to know a bit more about. So I'll kind of wrap up there and let people. And we can move on to the next part if you like.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Mark. This is a sort of very whistle-stop overview, this lunchtime webinar, just to kind of give people a bit of a taste and to ask some questions if there are more detailed questions. And in the follow-up email that we'll send, we'll put a lot of links to different sort of resources, pages, more information that folk can kind of go and find in more detail and come back to us by email as well for more of a chat. So we can, the next section, we've got 15 minutes left, so that should be plenty of time for a bit of question and discussion. I'll open it up if anybody wants to use the raise hand icon or just unmute your mic and shout out if there are any questions. And if not, I've got a couple. Talis has the hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Great. I've got a question about the whole farm plan soil analysis part. I mean, I heard you saying, Colleen, that the idea of the baseline is agroecological, but I've looked at this soil analysis and I can't figure out how different it is from anything that any farm has done before. It's very chemically focused. It's really about trying to reduce your fertilizer use, but it's also applicable to livestock keepers. And I'm interested in the livestock side. And I wondered if you can tell me a little bit more about it, because it doesn't look from the outside as if it's anything agroecological at all.
Thanks, that's a good question. I got halfway through typing a response and then didn't quite manage to finish that. So yeah, for the requirement for everyone to do the soil analysis, it's just very basic at this stage. I think because what exists in terms of what people have done is so variable across all the farms and crofts that, you know, some folk are kind of way ahead and doing quite in-depth soil analysis, and some folk have, you know, they've tested one field a couple of years ago and that's been it on the just sort of very basic NPK sort of basic soil test. So at this stage, the requirement for your basic payment and for the whole farm plan is just that very basic baseline, so that everybody's kind of on the same footing then to measure going forward. Obviously, what people have done already is so variable, and a lot of folk are way ahead of that. And if that's the case, then great, and you can do more than what the basic requirement is. So in terms of kind of soil testing for livestock, there might be sort of more in-depth testing that you would want to do, and you can sort of evidence that through your whole farm plan, but there won't be a requirement from that aspect for you to kind of evidence then you're doing more than the sort of basic pH, nutrient analysis, and soil organic matter. Does that kind of make sense? I don't know, Marc, if you want to add anything into that.
Can I come back to you on that though, Colleen?
Yeah.
Sorry, just before Marc jumps in, because I get what you're saying about it being so variable across the UK. That makes a lot of sense. But the question is what they will pay for, because as you just started to say there, they're paying for basic sort of NPK, pH, and carbon. But I'm interested in the biological microbe life in the soil. So I wouldn't want to go ahead and do that kind of analysis if I don't know if they'd actually pay for that. Would you get reimbursed?
I don't think so. So last year and possibly later in this year, there was some funding available through FAS, Farm Advisory Service, for carbon audits, and there has been for soil testing. That paused, I think, at the end of last year. So I'm not sure. I don't know if anybody else in the audience knows if there will be more funding this year for things like carbon audits and soil tests to be done for this. But I think probably what is likely to be funded, if there's funding available, would be the basic testing. So anything beyond that will be sort of for people to decide if they want to invest in that. You know, if you think that would have a benefit to your business, knowing what your kind of soil biological health looks like, and then how that can inform your decision making and your management to then you know, boost your productivity or sort of boost soil health and the impact that that'll have on what you're producing. So yeah, I'm not sure if there's anyone else that wants to jump in on that, but I think what will be that any support that will be available will be for the sort of very basic baselining.
Okay, thank you. Great, thanks a lot.
Thanks. So Marc, I wrote down a couple of things while you were talking more about the crop management plans, and just sort of picking up on legumes and how they're sort of integrated into rotations to help sort of build fertility and soil structure and everything. Are there sort of templates for different kinds of rotations that are available? And you know, different sort of options that you can take, or is it the sort of thing that people have to kind of sit and look at, you know, what kind of, you know, what they're producing, and kind of try and figure out for themselves what might fit best where in a rotation?
So we don't have a sort of fixed table, but we do have a lot of resources available through the website. So I can put a few links into the chat that kind of outline in sort of broad terms things, examples of crop rotations that could be employed. But I don't have a sort of fixed structure, if that's kind of what you're needing.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, it's just as a sort of starting point for people that haven't sort of built legumes into rotation very much before, just the sort of principles, or you know, where you start kind of thing. But yeah, if you're able to share links, we can also put them into the follow-up email as well. Excuse me. And yeah, have you, from the sort of licensees, the organic people that you speak to, is there much uptake of things like intercropping at the moment, of having kind of dual crops or using green manures or cover crops in between crops for like weed suppression, for example? Have you got a bit of a sense of whether a lot of people use that approach?
Yes, I've seen quite good uptake of intercropping, certainly in the last year. There's a few licensees that have, I think there was, it was peas or beans that they'd actually I think it was peas that they'd undersown under their wheat or barley, and it's, they were saying they'd done it for quite a long time, and it was, it worked quite well for them. But yeah, it seems to have quite good uptake, certainly the intercropping.
That's good. And I see there's some comments in the chat, so people can keep an eye on the chat as well for a bit of kind of chat into soil health and the detail that you can go into. And then for livestock, the thing around sort of grass-based diet and forage-based diet, do you see a kind of patterns of people using things like herbal leys and species-rich leys for the sort of nutrition aspect for livestock health as well? Like, is that easy to kind of quantify, or is it sort of try and have it as diverse as possible and hope that boosts health?
So I'm not sure that's necessarily easy to quantify, but we do have quite a sort of strong link between farms that have, so you can have what's called PFLA, or pasture for life certification, where it's only grass-fed animals, so they don't have any external sort of feed inputs, and they generally have quite sort of species-rich meadows and pastures that are grazed by the livestock to kind of maintain that nutritional profile that's needed by the animals throughout the year. I mean, I think broadly speaking, there's if you're sort of able to sort of introduce that into the whole thing, there's sort of very few sort of downsides to sort of building and maintaining that. It can kind of help with other things like sort of weed suppression as well, if you've kind of got good diversity with what's in the field as well. I mean, it's not going to stop things that are already established. Like if you've got a sort of big issue with creeping thistle or docks, then you're going to have to sort of tackle that either mechanically or otherwise. But it kind of can help sort of stop that getting a foothold in some instances at least.
Great. Are there any other questions at the moment that anybody wants to shout out? And if not, I'm going to quickly share a link for a very short feedback survey. If I can just find it again.
Just a comment from Talis. Yeah, I mean, ideally maintaining the soil structure and avoiding ploughing is ideal. I think it's a decision that you sort of need to sort of make a sort of important call on whether you sort of want to sort of go with what's there. It might be that you have something that you really sort of need tackled. I guess I think for livestock producers, if you do have issues with nutrient deficiency and you are really needing to sort of introduce something to the land sort of longer term, then you're going for a species-rich sward or something similar might be a sort of long-term solution. But I completely understand what you're saying. Like ploughing and sort of disrupting the soil structure that's already there is in a lot of instances can be negative. So.
And if you were sort of transitioning towards more diverse swards, is there options for sort of stitching in or kind of direct drilling of more varieties or more species into that, or is that quite tricky?
I'm not sure, if I'm honest. So I mean, I think probably a good one sort of chat through with other members of the farming and land use team. I mean, the licensees that I've spoken to that have sort of introduced sort of herbal leys at different times have usually done it with ploughing, but there might be capacity for sort of drilling or sowing it without ploughing.
Cool. I'm just very quickly typing in a link to a feedback survey. If people were able to quickly fill that in, and then we're nearly out of time. That's felt like a very quick hour. I hope it's been useful for people, and it's certainly given a good kind of overview of what's involved for the crop and the livestock side that fits into your whole farm planning. And unfortunately, I can't talk and type at the same time. There we go. So I've popped a link in the chat there. If people could click on that before they leave the meeting and fill in that very quick feedback survey, that would be super. And I think we can just wrap up there. Thanks very much, Marc, for kind of taking us through those crop and livestock plans. And I hope the kind of overview of the whole farm plan bit was useful for folk. If you've not seen the kind of the overview of everything before. If there's any other questions, pop them in the chat or just shout them out. You can email us afterwards as well. Keep an eye on our website because we'll be doing more webinars, farm walks, putting resources and videos out. So we'll do a follow-up email with links to all of that and to some of the other stuff that we've mentioned today. But yeah, we'll just close it there and say thank you very much, everybody, for attending. I hope that was useful, and we hope to see you again at something in the future.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks.
Cheers.